Good afternoon, folks. My name is Student Meteorologist Aaron Turay here on this Tuesday here on August here. We're actually talking about Hurricane Idalia, which is unfortunately making its track towards the Big Bend here. So again, that's why we're going to be coming on the air here and staying up all night as much as we can here as we track the storm off to the north. So right now we have that center of circulation just visible on radar right here, just off towards the west-northwest of Key West here, and it's tracking off towards the north, towards the Big Bend, and that's why it has been such a concern over the past couple days now as it's been trying to develop. But now we have a developed area here over the eastern Gulf of Mexico, tracking over up towards the Big Bend, up towards the northeast right now. I believe around 17 miles an hour from the last observation there, the National Hurricane Center. But already we're starting to see some squalls here along the west coast of Florida. So here, Naples, Fort Myers, extending all the way to Sarasota, Bradenton here, we're starting to see those squalls coming in off the Gulf of Mexico. And what that's doing is actually potentially increasing the chance of any kind of severe weather, especially these little spin-up tornadoes. We actually had a warning earlier here near the Naples area. But over Lee and Collier counties, we have this line of perhaps a very strong band of storms here from about Immokalee all the way towards Fort Myers and down to Bonita Springs here. And that's where we're having the risk of, at least right now, of the most severe weather, the most strongest band we have here. And that kind of goes up from around Immokalee here, if you look on velocity here. Not particularly strong on velocity right now, but again, these winds could definitely pick up here, and at least bands of the storm have been known to produce some severe weather in past. And again, this is not a unique storm in the sense that we could still see some severe weather along these bands that might come on and pivot around the center of circulation offshore. But you can see the broader picture here. We have all those storms arcing from about Key West to the Keys all the way through just off the coast of Tampa there. So again, this is all going to kind of pivot around the center of circulation as it does track off towards the northeast roughly, towards the Big Bend here. And unfortunately, what it's going to do is going to cause all this wind coming onshore here. That's going to cause the risk of perhaps some severe weather, some storm surge over the next several hours as it does make its track up towards the north. But again, we're going to see this continue on throughout the rest of tonight and into tomorrow morning as it does make its track all the way up towards the northeastern Gulf of Mexico. But if we actually zoom in a little bit closer towards Sarasota there, might see if there's anything going on. Yeah, there, that's about right. So looks like we have a strong little line coming up here from about Venice, Northport. It's kind of just going to arc over towards Manatee County, Sarasota County, and then probably into Pinellas and Hillsborough as well as it kind of pivots around here. So if you're along U.S. Route 41 or going south on 75, you really shouldn't be out. But if you are out, then you could run into the potential of a tropical downpour, which could be pretty intense at times, as it does again. We see these bands arcing up along the shoreline. Hasn't quite yet made its way up towards Tampa Bay, but that will soon change as we go out throughout probably the next hour or two as we see these bands just circulating around the center of low pressure. We do have a few spotty showers out near Polk and in upwards of northern Hillsborough County. So if you're near University of South Florida, Temple Terrace, Carrollwood, Pebble Creek, this particular heavy band here is moving from about the I-4, I-75 interchange, and it will kind of pivot up towards I-275 Lutz and 75 there here in the next couple of minutes or so to an hour. Again, as it all moves generally towards the north or so. We also have this heavier band near Sebring that's producing perhaps looks like a pretty good downpour there near southern Polk County into Highlands and DeSoto right there. Yeah, we zoom in a little bit closer just towards Sebring there. Yeah, so right here we have at least a decently strong comeback here on reflectivity. What that's showing is we're seeing a lot larger raindrops, more heavier density of rain. What's indicating is really heavy rainfall occurring here near Wauchula, Sebring, and mostly really arcing. All this is arcing off more generally towards the northwest here as it does pivot towards the north. So Lake Wales along U.S. Route 98 into U.S. 17 here, just north of Wauchula. We'll have to watch to see how this may perhaps impact travel if you are traveling just south of those U.S. routes there. But we do see a few little more bands coming up from the Gulf of Mexico, and this will kind of tend to pivot towards Pinellas County here over the next several hours or so. And again, this will just continue on and on and on throughout much of the night, though. So even though you may not see the eye wall particularly going near these areas, you might still, again, see some pretty strong winds as we do have a hurricane warning in effect for much of the west coast of Florida from about Manatee County, Sarasota County northward. So again, with the potential of seeing some hurricane force gusts at least, especially along the coast there. So you're talking, if you can zoom in closer to Pinellas County there to kind of give you guys some locations, some city names here, talk about at least along the coastline. So this includes Fort DeSoto, St. Pete, Clearwater, Indian Rocks Beach, all this area again, which probably has the greatest potential of seeing the highest winds, at least around the Tampa Bay area overnight tonight. So if I kind of move over here, again, also concerned too about storm surge, especially with Tampa. It's basically a bowl, guys. I mean, if you just shove a bunch of water into a small area, right, kind of like what you see in physics, right, and if you take the end of a hose and squeeze it, right, you see more water kind of piling up along these bays. And since this is facing towards the southwest, that's where we're going to see the risk of some storm surge here around Tampa Bay. So Bradenton, Ruskin, downtown Tampa especially here, and then kind of arcing along this southwestern coast here, McDill over towards South Tampa, again, might see the risk of some flooding. And we've seen it before, even with tropical storms well off to the west here, like Colin, for example, back, I believe it was 2016. That was just a tropical storm. That brought some flooding here near Bayshore all the way down to McDill. So again, this is definitely a different situation than what we've seen from Ian at this point, where with Ian, it attracted more to the south. We had actually an offshore wind here along Tampa Bay, and that actually brought water out. But unfortunately, it looks like this time we're going to see more of an onshore wind and bring more flooding perhaps towards much of the metro area. So if we zoom a bit further out, just kind of a view across the state of what's going on right now. For the most part, we're staying dry to the north towards our area, towards the Big Bend, at least with the exception of maybe the Panhandle here, where we had some showers kind of coming through earlier today. That has since been moving towards the west right now, so north of Panama City to I-10, and upwards to near Dothan, Alabama, and into Georgia here. Again, the potential for a few tropical downpours is all, I mean, it's not really associated with the storm, but it's just kind of still moving in that general direction around the center circulation down to the south here. So overall, the greatest risk here as the storm does kind of track behind me here towards places like near Leon County, of course, and Jefferson County later on, is we could see an onshore flow here. And this is the area probably the most susceptible to storm surge, perhaps in the country. This Big Bend area right here, because it's following geography there, with you're just kind of funneling a bunch of water in one spot. And that's going to occur along and just off towards the east of where that eventually that landfall point is, where that center of the eye circulation is going to happen. But you could still see even some water rise, even portions along the Forgotten Coast, so Franklin County, Gulf County, into Bay County as well, could perhaps see some minor flooding as well, even though they're on the what's considered the not the bad side of the storm, but it's still bad no matter where you're at. But perhaps less impacts as we have the more of an offshore wind as opposed to an onshore wind here, at least off towards the west. But again, you still should be taking the precautions right now. You got to wrap up those preparations, get those supplies, get that food, that water, all that you might need, especially if you're along the eastern panhandle over towards the Big Bend and off towards the west coast of Florida, as again, this is really from here on out, it's going to start going downhill, unfortunately, across much of us in west coast of Florida here. And again, this is historical, as we've seen earlier with the National Weather Service in Tallahassee saying this is actually a historical event occurring right now, should this make landfall along the Big Bend, which seems very likely as a major hurricane. So again, stay tuned with FSU Weather here all night long. For right now, we'll pass things off to Ryan to kind of give us more of a detailed view of the radar.
Yeah, Aaron, so on that, I want to note that a major hurricane has never made landfall in the Appalachia region of Florida, which when I say that, I mean like the Big Bend region of Florida. A major hurricane has never made landfall there in history, or at least recorded history. So the impacts, we can't really say, oh, this is going to be like Irma, or this is going to be like Ian, or Nicole, or any of the other storms that we've seen, Matthew, Michael, any of them, because we've quite frankly never seen a storm like this. So what we're seeing is this storm, here's the center of it, and it's going to work its way up to the Big Bend as we go throughout the overnight hours tonight, and then eventually make landfall somewhere near the Big Bend tomorrow morning. Here's a look at the track from the National Hurricane Center, keeping Idalia over the Gulf of Mexico, which is very warm. We have really warm waters in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's going to be working its way up close to the Big Bend. Now, I want to keep in mind with this track, if we can zoom in on the track, maybe get a couple names to pop up, because really we kind of take our focus to the center of the track, right, where the 3 is, where the spinning icon is. But really, the center of circulation can go anywhere between this track, and this is about 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, anywhere as far west here as making a close pass to Wakulla and Leon County, or can go as far east as something like Levi County. So we're really looking at a large area of where exactly the storm can go. The more latest spaghetti models are keeping Idalia kind of closer to us here in Tallahassee. You notice when we started this morning, some of the spaghetti models were a little further to the east, more focused on maybe a landfall in Taylor or another county like that. But now we're starting to focus more in on Wakulla, on Jefferson, Leon County as possibly being susceptible to a landfalling major hurricane. And so, like I mentioned, we've never had in the history of keeping track of storms, we've never seen Appalachia Bay major hurricanes. So Idalia would be the first. So there's no hurricane that we can compare this to. Every storm is a little bit different. All right. So where are we looking at in way of convection? We're already seeing some convection and some storms move through the Panhandle, but really, for the most part, this storm is still far off the coast of Fort Myers, just bringing a lot of squally weather into the area. So we've got near I-75, down near Fort Myers, and Naples. That's really where the strongest rain bands are right now. If we can put a quick measurement from Fort Myers to the center of Idalia, just to see how far off the coast of Florida from like near Fort Myers is. It's about 200 miles away from Florida, or from Fort Myers, I should say. And the storm, at least according to models, is expected to kind of hug the coast and kind of just bring a lot of squally weather into central Florida and working its way into North Florida. So as we go into the later hours today, I would say that central Florida into north central Florida, you need to be paying attention for the squally, windy conditions, as well as a little bit heightened of a tornado threat, because you are going to be on the right front side of the storm. And to Tampa, Orlando, Daytona Beach, those are the areas that we're going to be looking at a little bit heightened of a tornado risk. We've already seen a few tornado warnings pop up near Fort Myers, near Cape Coral, Cape Coral, I should say. No tornado warnings at the current time, but we've seen a couple quick spin-ups as well already move through. And we're not when we say tornado warnings with tropical systems, we're not talking EF5 tornadoes like you'll see out in Oklahoma. We're talking quick spin-up tornadoes that can bring 100+ mile per hour winds like that. And unfortunately, there's a lot of damage with that. Another thing I want to mention, along with potential impacts, especially along the west coast, as we get into the Gulf of Mexico, further up near the Big Bend, is that storm surge. We really need to pay attention to it because storm surge is the #1 killer during hurricanes. We want to hide from wind, but if we live near the water and we've been told to evacuate, it is time to get out. We still have a few more hours to go that we can safely evacuate before the center of Idalia is starting to focus its way on the Big Bend. We've got about 12 hours or so to go before the absolute center of it. So if you're thinking about evacuating, if you're in that situation of, you live near the water, you live somewhere that can, you feel the need, you feel unsafe, that you should absolutely consider evacuating. And if you are under a mandatory evacuation, I know in Leon County, those in mobile homes and manufactured homes have been told to evacuate, as well as, I believe, Taylor County for all coastal residents has issued mandatory evacuations. It is your time to go. Unfortunately, this storm is kind of going to be a strong storm as we work its way into the Panhandle and Big Bend in a way that we've never really seen it before, because, again, historically, we've never seen something quite like this, where a storm could be impacting almost all of Florida in a way that impacts both the peninsula, the Big Bend, and part of the Panhandle as we work our way over. Now I'm going to pass things off to Aaron, who's going to give you more about what the National Weather Service is saying regarding Idalia. Aaron?
That's right, Ryan. We actually, kind of zooming a bit closer to our area, our neck of the woods here across much of the Big Bend, We do have a hurricane warning in effect for much of at least the eastern Big Bend. So that includes Leon County, Franklin County, Leon County over towards Jefferson County, and all these counties off towards Big Bend. We also have storm surge alerts as well, storm surge warnings along that coast, again, extending from very far south near Tampa all the way arcing towards Apalachicola. But don't be surprised if some areas perhaps off towards the west, near Panama City, might perhaps get a little bit of extra elevated waters, not nearly as much as what we're going to see, perhaps historic flooding here across much of Big Bend. And the reason why it's going to be really historic is because we've never, as Ryan mentioned before, we've never seen a major hurricane like this since records began in 1851 make landfall along Appalachia Bay here. So again, everything where the center of the circulation does eventually make landfall, and then off towards the right-hand side is where we're going to see the worst of the storm surge, those conditions. And again, all being funneled in right here across the Big Bend. So as we kind of go back out, so we look, this is the weather service here in Tallahassee. Again, this is life-threatening. So we want to stress that you want to make sure you complete those plans here over the next several hours or so, as again, the worst of the conditions are expected to come in later on throughout tonight, and especially into tomorrow, is right around where it makes landfall, again, somewhere along the Big Bend. So again, we want to stress out very much that this can seriously cause a lot of damage here. And kind of going back towards Tampa here, we can see that, again, those warnings extend all the way down the west coast of Florida. So then down towards Manatee County, all of this area to the north is where we have the hurricane warning. So again, you want to make sure you want to expect hurricane conditions, really mostly, especially 75 off towards the west, towards the coast, is where we have the greatest potential for seeing those hurricane conditions. But again, that includes Manatee, Hillsborough, Pinellas, Pasco, Hernando, and Citrus counties, at least on the Tampa Bay area. Elsewhere off further towards the east, around Orlando, Polk County, southward towards Lee County, is where we have that tropical storm warning in effect. So that means you can expect to see tropical storm force conditions. That means winds up to perhaps, honestly, around 40 miles an hour is probably the most likely at this point. But again, you always want to prepare for the worst, hope for the best. That's kind of the whole theme we have here that you should be listening to. Because again, Orlando, Melbourne, this includes Polk County, Osceola County, and portions of Orange County. Again, all this area along the first coast of Florida is where we're going to see also tropical storm force conditions, especially as these bands kind of pivot around the center of circulation. Just like I just mentioned, that storm surge warning does extend all the way down the coastline through about coastal Sarasota counties, where again we expect those conditions to rapidly deteriorate on the coast. You want to make sure you run from water, hide from wind, just as Ryan mentioned earlier, because again, that's the #1 killer here with these storms, and you want to make sure you're not trapped in those, especially after what we've learned from Ian just not even a year ago, actually. So the National Hurricane Center here, we have Idalia located, if you're plotting this, 25.2 degrees north, 84.9 west right now, moving towards the north at 13 knots or 15 miles an hour. Again, pressure down to about 974 millibars. And the reason why I mentioned the pressure here is because as the pressure lowers in a tropical system, normally you tend to see a correlation with wind increasing as well, because you have a greater difference between the pressure at the center of the circulation and the pressure outside of it. And that's what causes wind. And when you have a strong gradient of pressure, that's normally when you start seeing the stronger wind. That's what's occurring right now here with Idalia, when, of course, we're watching it for the potential for it to rapidly intensify over the next 24 hours or so across the eastern Gulf. But we're going to pass things over toward the wall with Ryan.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Yeah, we've been kind of keeping an eye both on Twitter, on notifications as to what school districts are closed, what areas are closed, and for the most part, everywhere around the Big Bend and down the peninsula of Florida is closed. I know Florida State, we're closed through weekend. UCF is also closed. Many Tampa universities, such as University of Tampa, USF, they're closed. So let's kind of take that into preparation. It's time to prepare. We've got a few hours before Idalia starts really making its way closer to us. Here in the Big Bend, we've only got, but time is quickly running out. So if you are sitting there and you're like, oh no, I don't have any water, I don't have any batteries, I don't have gas, now is the time to do that, because once the storm hits, once we get later on into tonight and into the overnight, it's going to get to be too late to make those preparations. We're quickly running out of time. We're quickly running out of the opportunity. But if we take a look over Doak Campbell Stadium, you'll notice the skies are already getting pretty dark. We're just starting to see some of the outshoot of it. The Atlantic as a whole, we've got Tropical Depression 11 that just formed, and we've also got another system coming off the coast of Africa. We've got Category 3 Hurricane Franklin, and then Category 1 Hurricane Idalia. That's where we want to pay our most attention to as it does start to work its way towards the Big Bend into the overnight hours by 8 a.m. tomorrow, coming very close to a landfall somewhere near the Appalachian Bay and the Big Bend. So as we take a look at the visible satellite, we're really going to notice how Idalia is getting closer together. And for the closer look at Idalia, I'm going to pass it off to Robert.
Right now we're looking at the satellite here for Idalia. It's moving off towards the north. Right now you can see it's a little bit southwest of Fort Myers. So this is where we have the setting of the storm right now. It is going to impact as we move over towards the future. So right now for our live radar here, really the impacts for us are these squall lines moving towards the Florida Peninsula. Here's the city of Fort Myers. They just had their first real big band go through. I know on the Weather Channel they saw some video of that. Really heavy rain, really strong winds. It's important to know that it's not just the center of this storm that's having the most impacts. Even these outer bands can have some pretty gusty winds, some heavy rain, even that tornado potential with it. So here's the current setup with the storm. We're watching these spaghetti models that give you the best idea of where the track of the center of the storm could go. These are going to move off towards the north and east as we have some other features in our weather in the U.S. sort of pushing it off towards the northeast. The question is, when will it take that turn? Earlier models suggested it could take it as early as closer to Cedar Key and move towards Gainesville. Now it's moved off a little bit towards the west. So us here in Tallahassee are a little bit under that threat, a little more than we thought in the past. So off towards that north and east there, and looking specifically towards Tallahassee, we have these models here, each of them really showing some to the west, some to the east. But if you're here in the city, you really need to be taking your precautions now, because no matter where, it looks like we'll be seeing at least some impacts. I would say more than minimal at the very least, but we could be seeing some fairly significant impacts with this storm depending on its track. So again, primary impacts here in the city are going to be mostly with power outages, heavy wind, and very heavy rain as well. Not seeing much storm surge impacts in the city, but if you're on anywhere in the Gulf Coast of the Appalachian Bay, all these onsen will show you the storm's really going to be pushing all this water up into here. That's a big concern for us. And it's a very moist storm. You can see it's pushing all this water vapor towards us. We could see up to maybe 5-6 inches of rain here in the city of Tallahassee and across the area. Some could see up to maybe even 8 inches of rain. So that's an important thing to remember as we're seeing this storm moving up, that we're not just looking for coastal flooding, but areas that are in floodplains inland with all this rain and deluge we're going to see could bring a situation for inland flooding. So it's important that if you're anywhere near a creek or stream over the next few days, that you are not turning around, or that you're turning around and you're not drowning if your car is going somewhere you see that could be a flooding spot. So here's the reason we're so concerned. There is a little bit of shear out there which helps to mitigate the storm, but it's very, very hot outside with the Gulf Coast here, and you're seeing sea surface temperatures well above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which is really helping to fuel the storm's growth. And right now, it's just below Category 2 strength. As it moves off towards the north and east, it can strengthen up to maybe even a Category 3, or get to that maybe even top end Category 3 level as it gets closer to the Big Bend. And this area has not seen a major hurricane in recent recorded memory. So I know some people in Tallahassee thought they really went through the bit of Michael there, that Category 5 strength there, but that was off towards the west in Panama City. It's important to remember in Tallahassee it was much weaker. So this is going to be a lot stronger for some people than Hurricane Michael was. All important things to remember over this storm the next few days. We will keep you updated with every single piece of this storm as it develops and wherever it moves. I'm going to pass things off back to Ryan to talk a little bit more.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Robert. And you talked a little bit about flooding. In Hurricane Ian, we saw unprecedented flooding in Central Florida. But let's talk about wind speed first, and then we'll get to flooding here in a second. Right now, Idalia is a Category 1 hurricane, which has winds between 74 and 95 miles per hour. Surge-wise, about 3 to 4 feet. But as Idalia starts to strengthen, we'll see it become a Category 2 here in a little bit, 96 miles per hour. Idalia is just shy of that, sitting in the 90 mile per hour range with up to 110 mile per hour winds and 5 to 6 feet of surge. And then eventually Idalia will strengthen to a Category 3 hurricane, which is what it's expected to make landfall as here in the Big Bend. It's got 111 to 130 mile per hour winds and 9 to 12 feet of storm surge. Now let's take a look at this home, shall we? With major damage to the outside of the home, power lines sapped. I know a lot of areas around don't have the greatest power grid, and I know FPL, Duke Energy, and all the other power companies have been working hard to make sure They've got their alignment in place, ready to go for once it's safe that they'll be bringing in the crews. But if you lose power, it is important to make sure you have your phones charged beforehand, have those backup batteries ready, and then have the flashlights on hand, have anything that you need to keep you safe, keep you fed. You need to have water on hand, something like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or something that can keep you fed. And then as we go further down the line, Category 4, hopefully Idalia does not get that strong, but it's certainly not out of the realm as it enters the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. We've got 131 to 155 miles an hour winds. Now, if you remember back to Hurricane Michael, when it made landfall in Mexico Beach, it was a Category 5 with 155 mile per hour winds and over 18 inches of storm surge. On this graphic, you can see that house is just completely covered in storm surge. So let's talk more on storm surge, all right? So we've got our normal sea level, all right? And then as the hurricane gets stronger, the surge will actually increase. So there'll be more water added. So we could add up to 12 feet of water to these coastal communities, which, if you remember, during Ian and during Katrina, just brought a ton of water to both New Orleans and the Fort Myers area. So we're now in the pre-storm area. So let's kind of take an idea of what we need to do. We need to pay attention to National Hurricane Center, National Weather Service for updates. We need to assess and know if we're told to leave, we need to leave. It is time to go if you are being told to leave. And then, again, keep those phones charged, get all your important documents together, get supplies ready, and strengthen your home. During the storm, listen to emergency alerts. If you have a weather radio, that's great. Sometimes your phone might not even go off because you don't have a cell connection or you don't have power. You need to be aware if there's flooding issues, if there's a tornado, you need to be made aware of that. So if you have a weather radio, make sure that is ready to go, or have a way to get warnings during the storm. Take refuge and avoid flood waters. And then we'll worry about after a storm later. But again, pay attention to the local officers. They know best of how to keep you safe, as well as avoid any downed electrical equipment or flood waters, and save those phone batteries for emergencies only. Now I'm going to pass off to Aaron, who has more on how Florida is responding and what electrical issues look like so far.
That's right. We actually, right now, we're not reporting any power outages, but that will soon change as we go into tomorrow. Can you guess why? But for the most part here, as we see those squalls coming in towards coastal portions of southwest Florida, we do have to run the potential for some power outages from really anywhere from Monroe County all the way up the coast. And it will continue to kind of follow its way up the coast here as the storm does track closer towards landfall eventually here somewhere around the Big Bend. So the only county, at least in our local area, that has some, looks like, some, at least customers without power outages here, is in Wakulla County here. So it looks like 17,444 that are tracked and 561 that are out. So very low percentage, even of this county, which is a pretty low population here. Besides that, for the most part, most people do have power across much of the west coast of Florida and Big Bend. Looks like Santa Rosa County here on the Panhandle might have some power outages, but that's not really associated with Idalia specifically, but perhaps those showers and storms that are making their way kind of through right now as we speak. So for the most part, we're staying clear right now on much of these actual, at least for right now in terms of power. But if you look towards cameras here, for the most part, this is our southwest Florida County cameras here. So along 75, for the most part, we're starting to see that rainfall. And the reason why we have that rainfall is because if we look towards our radars, if I can find it real quick, stand by, there we are here. We have those bands that are coming in here towards the southwest Florida. So again, Collier County, Lee, all the way up through Sarasota and Hillsborough counties, where we're starting to see that rainfall starting to kind of on the camera lens here. So if we go back towards our southwest Florida cameras here, that's why we do have that rainfall on the roadways. And again, right now, if you're in southwest Florida, you should probably be wrapping up those hurricane supply runs right now, as those conditions are going to begin to deteriorate and only go downhill here. I will say for right now, if you're in the Big Bend, you might have a few hours left, but that's still, normally the rule of thumb is right when you get to tropical storm force conditions that move through your area, you normally want to stop by that point. But after that, it's just too late. You need to hunker down after that. And at least we might have a few hours here across the Big Bend, but in southwest Florida. That time's kind of running out here now. Moving further north towards Tampa right now, for the most part, looks like they're pretty clear. Maybe some few overcast skies there, some at least over much of the Tampa Bay region. This will soon change as those showers and storms do again rotate towards the Tampa Bay area. So again, US 98, US 19, all clear right now on our Tampa cameras, and then even clear as we get towards the Panhandle here. So looking at much of, again, Bay County here, that should really stay okay until we get towards the later hours as that storm does eventually move its way towards our area. So kind of looking on social media here, for the most part, we're going to begin to see a lot of the storm rapidly intensify over the next several hours. And the reason why is because we have that deep, warm water in the Gulf of Mexico, and that's helping to kind of supply and bring in that fuel, what the storm needs to actually intensify. Not to mention, too, we're actually seeing kind of a lack, or I should say less wind shear loft as it moves into the eastern Gulf of Mexico. And that together is going to help for the storm to kind of vertically stack. I guess kind of an analogy here, if you kind of think of like, say, Jenga tower, right? A stable tower is one that is structurally sound, right? But once you start moving blocks, or in other words, once you start introducing shear, it can topple over and you don't have such a stable tower anymore, right? So that's kind of the same way here with hurricanes. So as you vertically stack the lower level, the mid-level, and the upper level low pressure centers here, that will allow the storm to kind of vent out properly, allow that moisture content coming from the Gulf of Mexico, and actually able to kind of fuel the hurricane as it does track its way to the north. But again, for the most part, we're seeing much of the storm action occurring on the eastern side of the storm. That's because we do have a tiny bit of wind shear, but again, it's very much lax compared to at least the last several days. So if we go to the National Hurricane Center's website here and go in towards wind speed probabilities at this point, as of the 8 a.m. advisory here, at least it looks like they haven't updated recently, but you can see for tropical storm force conditions, we expect almost near 100% for pretty much Tampa Bay northward, all the way through Jacksonville, just north of the Jacksonville area, then all the way towards basically our area, the eastern Big Bend, is where we're going to see the risk of having the highest risk of any kind of tropical storm force conditions. And again, that will continue to move off towards the northeast as we see the eventual storm move off toward the northeast as well. So this is the earliest reasonable time of arrival for tropical storm force conditions. In other words, this is a time where you need to stop. In other words, after this, it's just too late to start doing or is continuing any kind of preparation. So right now, it looks like for about Tuesday at around 8 p.m. around the Tampa Bay region is where you should basically be done with your hurricane runs and all that. You want to make sure you have your supplies by that point, by about 8 p.m. here tonight across the Tampa Bay area. About Gainesville over towards about our neck of the woods around 2 a.m. So after midnight or so is, again, you want to end those preparations, and that kind of extends off towards the north as the storm does track in that direction. So again, we want to watch out as we do eventually watch the storm head towards our area and cause some damage then. But we'll pass things back off to Robert.
Here's Cedar Key right now. Still a little far away from the storm itself, but we are seeing some of those earlier outer bands starting to make its way towards the Florida Big Bend. Here are some of these clouds making its way towards Cedar Key, and we are seeing a few of that development back here. As we get closer to time, you're going to see a few more storms start to wave in. You'll see some of those first few waves and those gusty winds really start to pick up later into this night and starting tomorrow morning. In Cedar Key itself, like we'll see up to 10, maybe even more feet of storm surge. So if you're there right now, I know I heard 98% of people have already evacuated from Cedar Key. You want to get out of there. This is not a safe place to be during the storm. Significant storm surge will be seen there. Let's take a look at the radar right now just to see where the storm is developing. And if we could just move a tad bit west so we have the whole view of the storm here. These are our outer bands here over the peninsula. In fact, a severe thunderstorm warning west of Miami. So this storm, the impacts are being felt way beyond the center. Here's the center. We're seeing some outer bands up even close into the peninsula, or the panhandle up there and the peninsula. So we'll actually zoom in towards the panhandle here, look at some of these storms. Not seeing too much in the way of severe weather or tornadic weather yet. We'll get a little more concerned about that closer to time here. But we are seeing a few of these outer bands pack a little bit of a punch with some lightning, some heavy winds, some heavy rain as well. So if you're driving outside, if you're in the process of evacuating or making your last minute plans, you might want to make sure you are heading indoors when these bands get there, because they're not going to make it for good driving conditions, that's for sure. So here is the center of the storm right now. It's just a little bit west off of Florida, southwest of Tampa, and it's moving about due north I believe last time I checked it was around 10 miles per hour it was moving. So here is the storm. It's going to be moving towards this direction. But as I said, again, impacts felt way beyond the center of the storm. So we saw a band move through Tampa earlier. Another band is moving through Fort Myers at the moment. And we're seeing all this movement up towards the north and west. And again, we'll keep you updated as we see any more warnings or watches or advisories of a severe nature put out. And we did already update you with how many hurricane watches and warnings we do have out there. So again, we're continuing to watch this ongoing situation with the storms here. And we're also continuing to see that the development of the storm is actually increasing. So if we could go to IR right now, actually skip this radar real quick just so I can show the development of the storm. Thank you. So we're seeing this visible satellite here, and what I want to show you here is the colors. What you see are these charcoals in the middle of the storm. That's showing these strongest or highest cloud tops. Now, why are cloud tops important? They show us where exactly in the storm you have the most intense storms. You usually see that closest to the center of the eye wall or the center of where that storm is the strongest. So again, we're watching for this IR right now, those charcoals, and you might even see some light pinks in there. That's where you see the strongest satellite figures to go with. So here is the storm in front of us right now. And this is the center of Idalia, off towards the north and east. This is Hurricane Franklin. That's no threat to Florida right now. This is Hurricane Idalia. You see these charcoals in there, and even a little bit of that white? That's where you see these highest cloud tops. Now, what we technically measure is the cloud top temperature, and the coolest we have in there, that means it's the highest. But that's starting a little more complicated meteorology there. All you need to know is this is the center of the storm, and it's the strongest. And here's our visible view. You can really see the organization of this storm in here. Here's the center of it right in there, and these are our outer bands sort of flowing into the storm here, just showing how much moisture is available and how powerful the storm is getting. And most importantly, I want you to zoom in closer to the center of the storm here where we think that eye wall might be forming within the next maybe 12 hours or so. That area, you can kind of already start to see it even on the zoomed out view. It's starting to really show you that area, that pinhole starting to develop, the beginning stages of what we see as an eye in the hurricane here. So right there, you can't really see it at the moment, but we will be able to see it soon as it starts to develop, and that will be crucial to knowing how strong the storm is developing. Once it can get that eye developed and that eye wall start getting going, we will know this storm will be rapidly intensifying, and that's a concern for the Florida Gulf Coast, because once it starts rapidly intensifying, it's expected to be basically intensifying all the way up into landfall. So we need as little time as possible for this storm to intensify, because that means it could be weaker by landfall. But all signs ahead of us show a lot of warm water ahead of it, lower shear environment. So unfortunately, we are expecting a higher end storm out of this. So let's go back to the radar real quick. I know we skipped over that earlier, just to show you a few of those cells on those outer bands that we are watching right now for your stronger wind gusts and a little more concerning features. I know there was a severe thunderstorm warning on Alligator Alley earlier. It's in fact still in effect right now. If you could query that, maybe see when that's in effect until. This is the storm right here. It's a little bit north of I-75, west of US 27. It's going to be moving with the direction of this storm off towards your, I would say, northwesterly a little bit there. So if you're driving on Alligator Alley west of Tampa right now, I would say pull off before you get to US 27, because this is going to be some dangerous driving conditions. If you're driving east towards Tampa, that's where you need to also, I would say, if you can, if you have to get through this, slow down, turn your wipers on, turn your lights on, because this is going to be some heavier driving conditions. But fortunately, it is moving north and west, so I-75 should be clear within the next few minutes there. If we could zoom out, and then I'll go back towards the western coast of the peninsula there, we're seeing just some reasonably heavy rainfall rates closer to Fort Myers and Northport right now. Fortunately, I know Fort Myers area, you already went through a very heavy hurricane during the last season. Fortunately, it looks like the impacts from Idalia to you will be fairly on the lower end, but still, we're watching tropical storm force winds, maybe a little bit of storm surge there, so important to take the storm seriously, even if it's not going directly towards you. Let's move out towards Tampa a little bit. I know I saw a few storms up there earlier, and they've cleared out now, closer to Winter Haven now. Tampa itself, you are clear at the moment, but really our concern for you is not about any of these squall line storms that we're seeing with the outer bands of the storm. What we're seeing with Tampa, our worry, is all this water that's being pushed up into the Gulf Coast. It's going to really go into Tampa Bay, and you could see up to 10 feet of storm surge in some locations, closer to 5 for most, and maybe even lower than that But even 5 feet of storm surge will do significant damage to parts of the area that are right on the Gulf Coast. So if you're in any of those mandatory evacuation zones like Zone A or any of the ones that are right on the coast there in Pinellas County or Hillsborough County, you need to be heading to higher ground, having a family house or someone you know where you can go to that's away from the water, because even if Idalia is not making landfall in Tampa and it's affecting closer to the Tallahassee area, you will still see effects from that in the way of storm surge, and it's really important to emphasize. So right now, here are some of these outer bands moving through Lakeland and Winter Haven. Let's zoom out a little more just to get a wider view of the storm and just sort of summarize what we're seeing here with Idalia right now. It's still moving off towards the north, maybe a little bit of that eastern movement, sometimes with a wobble. We're not really seeing that turn happen yet. When we see that turn, that's going to be essential to determine where exactly it'll go. If it makes it all the way to Alligator Point, St. Mark's area without turning, that means that Tallahassee will likely have greater effects. But if that northeast turn starts to happen a little bit closer to west of Cedar Key, then Tallahassee could miss on some of the worst effects. Models are currently indicating we're favoring a little bit western track, so closer to that Tallahassee area, but we'll have to wait and see. We still have about 24 hours left before that turn happens. So right now we have these outer bands here, Fort Myers, Tampa. That's the immediate concern for us. Storm surge on the eastern coast of Florida. We're not really going to see some of the worst effects in the Panhandle start for at least another 8 or 10 hours. But once those effects start, they probably will keep going until later in the day on Wednesday, maybe even early Thursday, depending on the progression of this storm. So again, right now this storm is moving off towards the north and east. Here are spaghetti models we're showing here. These have moved a little west with the 18Z update. They were a little bit east around 6 hours ago, around I'd say this point right here. They have moved a little bit further west towards the Tallahassee area. So we really want to emphasize that even though Tallahassee is technically outside of the cone, if it just tracks barely to the east, we could see some of that eye wall effect here. That's really strong storms, hurricane force winds up to maybe even Category 3 in some locations, and widespread power outages. So it's important that you in Tallahassee are taking this storm seriously. This is probably the strongest storm we've seen in a while, and likely stronger than any of the impacts we saw from Hermine back in 2016 or Michael in 2018. These are the sea surface temperatures. It's really driving this storm's development as it continues off towards the north and east. As it continues this path here, it's going to gain strength. Right now it's just below Category 2 strength. We expect possibly even with the next advisory it could be Category 2. By the time it gets to the coast of the Big Bend here, it could be a Category 3, maybe even a high-end Category 3 major hurricane. So we'll have to watch for that as it continues moving off towards the north and east. So again, if you're anywhere in the Gulf Coast of Florida up here in the Panhandle, or even the western coast towards Tampa and down towards Fort Myers, you need to be taking this storm seriously. Storm surge is a threat, always important to make sure we emphasize that. Anyone under the hurricane warning is likely to see hurricane force winds that could cause power outages with trees, and of course, make sure you are also paying attention to the threat of tornadoes. We will keep you updated throughout the day and throughout the rest of the week, or throughout the rest of the day and tomorrow on what we have here with FSU Weather. But I'm going to pass things off now for more information on this storm.
Right, Robert, we do have a lot of information here to kind of go through. But first off, I did want to show you guys a graphic from the Weather Service here in Tallahassee, kind of showing how unprecedented this actually is, because back towards 1851, when records actually began being recorded, we actually have never seen a major hurricane, I guess in other words, a Category 3 or higher make landfall in the Big Bend, or specifically Appalachia Bay here. So again, this is really indeed historical. As we do forecast it to make landfall, again, really within this area where we're kind of highlighting here, at least on the map here. Again, it can make landfall anywhere as far east towards Cedar Key into near Citrus County, or offward towards the Apalachicola and St. George Island there. So again, anywhere in here is where we could see that hurricane make it landfall over the next coming hours. But I did kind of want to give you a little bit of the 7-day forecast put out by the Weather Service here. Kind of for the Tallahassee area, and for the most part, again, this afternoon we expect these storms to kind of come through, perhaps pivot around this these center of circulation here. And it's not until we get into tonight or tomorrow where we have those tropical storm conditions at least expected here, if not seeing hurricane conditions possible, as we are underneath that hurricane warning, in fact, until further notice here. After that, we will see a break of the weather here, at least. But again, we have to get through Idalia first. So a flood watch is also in effect for the Big Bend, as again we could see the storm dump a lot of rain here across much of these rivers. So that would mean the Apalachicola River, and then those rivers off towards the east. Again, we have the potential for some river flooding besides storm surge as well. Keep that in mind. And that water, again, you want to hide. You want to hide from wind and you want to run from water. Water is the #1 killer here. So kind of coming back towards some key messages here from the National Weather Service. Again, much of the Gulf Coast here is in effect with that hurricane warning from about Tampa roughly over towards the north here. But again, we want to make sure we stress this enough that this is a very serious situation as we continue on throughout the next several hours or so into tomorrow. And the other thing I wanted to kind of show you on the topic of water here is the risk of flash flooding, where we have a at least a moderate risk of flash flooding, at least a 40% chance of that, just off towards the east of Tallahassee, over towards about the Gainesville area, all this. In other words, wherever the storm makes landfall and all towards the east, where we can see normally the biggest chance of that flooding. But again, we also do have a trough kind of digging in from the north and west. What that actually might do is it might actually to help kind of elevate some convergence or so to help with this more storms and more of this precipitation to develop around it too. So we'll have to watch kind of these features play out over the next several hours. But again, the highest risk of flash flooding is here just off to the east and over kind of towards up to North Carolina there near Wilmington over towards Charleston. But again, you can still see flash flooding anywhere along the state of Florida here. So from about Miami all the way towards Mobile and Alabama here. So just because this little red strip is showing the highest risk does not mean that you cannot see some flash flooding. And again, that is probably the biggest danger here as we continue on throughout the next several hours here across, at least across the Big Bend and into much of the west coast of Florida. So again, we'll kind of take a look at some cameras here. So for the most part, as I kind of stressed out earlier, we're seeing at least some of the rain kind of pivoting in from the actual storm here, kind of coming in from the Gulf of Mexico over towards Collier County, Lee County. So if we go towards actually a radar here, this is why we're seeing that rainfall in the camera lens. We have those bands, those feeder bands kind of coming in, wrapping around the center of circulation here, which is just offshore here. And again, this will probably persist over the next several hours or so as this does track off towards the north. So Tampa, we're starting to see that those conditions starting to deteriorate here as those bands are starting to make their way into Hillsborough, Pinellas, and into Pasco counties as well, and also kind of coming in towards, just off towards the west of Lake Okeechobee is where we're starting to see those feeder bands kind of coming in here over at least across southwest Florida and central Florida. Upwards near the panhandle of Florida here, we're staying relatively wet, at least especially off towards the west of Tallahassee here, so Panama City over towards much of Mobile, again seeing that rain showers occurring. But we'll take a bit of a break here on FSU Weather as we're going to continue live coverage later on with Hurricane Idalia as it does near much of the state of Florida. So again, stay tuned on FSU Weather as we'll be back here very shortly and soon, of course.